This is Donna, and we are still live in Nashville, and we are going to talk to Cynthia about her book, Anchored, and she and I just even planned we're going to come back tomorrow and talk about Live Bold, so you'll definitely want to check back with us tomorrow as we start more interviews. But today we are going to talk about Anchored, and it's leading through the storms. And so, Cynthia, I'll let you open up and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about the book.
Sure. So, well, my name is Cynthia Cavanaugh, and I've been in full-time ministry for many, many years, and I also teach at a university near where I live. So I teach in a leadership degree program for international students and for adult learners, and it's my passion. So leadership is really my passion. I love giving people the tools and all of that, how to do that. And I'm also, I've been married for almost 4 decades. It's a long time, sounds really long, but it is. And I'm so grateful for that. So we have a really redeeming story in that as well. I have 3 adult married sons, and they live in various places. One lives close near us, and then we also have 7 grandchildren, which are the delight of my heart. So when I'm not writing or speaking or teaching, I am spoiling those little ones, and it's really, I just love it.
That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about Anchored. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay, sure. Well, Anchored is a book that is targeted at ministry leaders, pastors, small group, women's ministry leaders, children's, anybody who finds them in position of leadership. So it's targeted at that to help leaders for encouragement. Like, what do you do when your life falls apart? What do you do when someone betrays you? What do you do when you have a wayward child? Do I step out of my leadership position? Who do I go to for help? How do I navigate this? And so that's really the premise of the book, is a tool of encouragement, using biblical examples, of course, and stories. And I've done a lot of research on storms in particular, like hurricanes and snowstorms. And a really interesting storm I found, it's called the Haboob storm. It's actually a sandstorm, but with a kind of a funny name, and they mostly happen in the Middle East. But anyway, and that one's on Doubt. So
wow, we wouldn't have thought of that as a
Yeah,
story.
no.
So share a little bit about like how the book came about to you personally.
Sure. Well, about 10 years ago or so now, my husband and I found ourselves in what I have called it a perfect storm. And perfect storm, several years ago, there was a storm that were 3 different storms converged into one on the East Coast in the early 90s, and there was a movie made about that with George Clooney called The Perfect Storm. And so that's kind of how I describe it. There was these 3 main things that were happening in our life. Our kids were leaving home. Both of us had a growing platform happening in our lives. And then we had this third piece of kind of this dysfunction in our marriage that had just been rearing its ugly head from times, and it was cyclical. So when all these things converged, woke up one day, not one day in particular, but that's how I phrase it, as finding that these things needed to be fixed. And it's a long story, and I speak about it, I share about it. My husband's given me permission to talk about it. We talk about it, but our lives fell apart, and we separated for a while, and I knew the cost of that because I'm married to a pastor. It's not like if I was married to a plumber or a real estate agent, that people would feel sorry for them in the office, or, but they wouldn't lose their job. As a pastor's wife, it's taking a huge risk, because I knew my husband could lose his job. So anyway, we separated for a while to give some room to figure out, because we're so enmeshed in ministry, doing everything for God's kingdom, it's a ministry first, that our own marriage got lost in that, and we didn't pay attention to the warning signs. Even though we were doing all the right things, we were dating once a week, we went away on trips, but we didn't attack the things that were really the deep-rooted things that had shaped us even from childhood, that we needed to fix for God to use us in a greater way, right? So God was saying, hello, you two. Hello, you guys going to pay attention to this? Because if I'm going to take you to this place, for your character needs to match your calling, we need to work on this, right? So that started a journey of, we got back together, went through intensive counseling, and so that's kind of how the book was birthed. in that sense of, I knew I wanted to write a book because as far as leadership, like, who do you go to talk to? Like, I didn't really know who I could talk to. Who could I trust? I certainly couldn't really talk to anybody in my church, about what was going on. I mean, I did talk to the board. They did talk to me. But beyond that, right, like, who's really going to help in this? And I know I'm not alone. I know that ministry is stressful, and we need support. We need counseling. Not that your congregation, the people in the congregation life isn't stressful. I'm just saying it. When you're in full-time ministry, it carries its own unique set of, roles and things that you have to be responsible for that can create stress in your own lives, right? So that's kind of how the book was birthed.
Oh, yeah, and I can imagine just feeling a burden for your congregation, and that is something like, our teams are a lot smaller than your congregation would normally be. So give us some examples in the book about like how the different struggles you saw people go through in the Bible that kind of relate to us.
Sure. Well, one of the chapters is on sharp disagreements, which is Paul and Barnabas. As we know, that Paul and Barnabas at one point had a very sharp disagreement about where they were going to go and who they were going to take with them. Barnabas wanted to take someone else with them, and Paul did not want that person to come with. So, they had to agree to disagree, and then they parted, of course, and went separate ways. And yes, God used that in both of their lives, but sometimes that happens. So that's one of the things that can happen in ministry. Sometimes you can be working together with a partner in ministry, and you have a sharp disagreement of wherever God thinks you want to go. And so that's something we address in the book. Like, what do you do when that happens? How do you retain your integrity? How do you protect that other person and yourself as well? So that's one example that we look at.
Oh, that's good. So kind of in closing, let's talk about like, what is your goal that people that read it, that will get out of it? Like, how will they be impacted, I guess?
I think my goal in reading Anchored is just that they would be deeply encouraged and realize again that they're not alone. And that's one of the reasons my husband and I wanted to tell a part of our story in the first chapter. Is you can't talk about those things authentically unless you share a little of yourself. So I wanted them to know, first of all, that they're not alone, and that what they're doing matters, that leadership matters, and that their influencing matters, and that when they're faced with a big storm in their life, it doesn't disqualify you for ministry. And it doesn't define you either, right? It doesn't have to. And that there is redemption, and to hang on. And during that season of my life, I always joked and said my favorite verse in the Bible was, or my favorite phrase was, and it came to pass.
Yep.
That God said I would never be in that place, forever. Right. And it came to pass. Yeah. So that's probably the greatest thing that I want people to remember.
So if you don't care, before we end, we'll jump over to your leadership and your passion for helping leaders in your work. So from that perspective, share something that you feel like would encourage leaders out there, and something like if they wanted to do one thing to kind of improve their leadership, what would you encourage them to do?
I would encourage leaders to take some reflection time. We can get caught up in all the tasks and the to-do, and I find just even a lot of the leadership theory that I teach is to get across to people when I'm teaching to these young students who want to be great leaders, is that first of all, if you want to be a great leader, you got to follow Jesus' example and be a servant. Learn to be a servant. That your pants are never so big that you can never serve. You can never don't say you can't take out the trash, or I can't do this or help. Okay, so that would be one thing I want leaders to be aware of. But the other thing is to cultivate that emotional intelligence. Knowing that how your behavior impacts other people is key. A lot of the leadership mistakes that I have seen, even in my own life that I've learned the hard way, and seen other leaders make, is the lack of self-awareness of how their behavior impacts other people. And as a leader, if you are aware of how your behavior impacts other people, you will be on your way to being an incredible leader. And I think that's really important in this day and age, especially.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So I always like to end with something fun.
Okay.
We did talk about your book. I wanted to talk about Under the Broom Tree.
Okay.
So if you would just share a little bit about that, because it is a free opt-in on your
Yes.
website. And
Yes.
so it's a 10-day devotional and journal for women struggling with depression. So
Yes.
would you tell a little bip about that book?
Sure. Well, several years ago, I went through a season of clinical depression, and so I kept journals. And so I took from my journals pieces of what I was experiencing. And one of the things I found for people that are depressed is, like my pastor said, just read this, read that, read the Bible. And I'm like, you don't get it. I can't concentrate for more, because this is what the depression did. I had short little bites. So I created this short little devotional with just a little bit of a reading, a little bit of scripture, a little bit of encouragement, and then a place where they could journal and write. And so that's what Under the Broom Tree is. It's just a little bite size, like Elijah. He's under the broom tree. He's exhausted, and the angel comes and makes him breakfast. So you can think of it as a little bit of breakfast, a little thing for you to chew on and think about if you're suffering with depression, or if you know someone that's suffering with depression, because it's rampant. It is so rampant today.
Yeah, it is. Some of the other authors we had in were talking about they had overcome it, but they're also they'll struggle with it. So, okay, so I promise now we're really ending. Just one more question. So I always like to end an interview and ask, like, what would readers be surprised to know about you?
Oh, what would readers? Well, okay, what readers might be surprised if they don't know me, to know that I have another side of me, as far as I have a creative side besides the writing. Is I love to sew, and so I just finished, in fact, a little princess dress for one of my granddaughters, and it's a gift that my grandmother gave me. She taught me how to sew, and so it's kind of like therapy for me. It's and I don't put it on. Sometimes I share it, not for people to say, "Oh, it's so beautiful," but it's just passing on of a legacy, and the delight that I see in my grandchildren's face when they open something I've made them, or someone else. It's just really it just kind of fills me up. It's kind of like a refresher for me.
Yeah. So my friend Pauline may be watching, and she loves to knit, and to me that is so stressful. But to her it is totally relaxing, and she can do it anywhere. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't do it. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I do. I think it's just wonderful to share and help people see the encouragement out there, and I just think it's courageous to be vulnerable in front of people. It's that it's what helps people know that they're not alone, and to know you're writing and talking from a place of having been there. So.
Well, it's been an obedience thing, really. God said, you have to do this. So, and I'm like, okay, Lord, I'll be faithful to be obedient.
Yeah. Even if it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you guys for watching, and we will post links to her website and to the book on the blog. Just give us a couple weeks to get caught up. Thanks.